Okay, so we are back to debate number 4 of the NSCAC Soccer Hub online debates. On this panel, we will try to answer the question, does the United States women's national team deserve higher pay? And for that, we invited Audra Sherman, Carmelina Moscato, and the panel will be moderated by Richard Pucciarelli. Before I introduce them into this discussion, as you know, this is an online and live discussion, so we'll be able to ask as many questions as you want. Richard will select some of the questions so it can be answered by our speakers. So now I'm going to introduce on the conversation Richard. Hello, Richard. How are you?
Hi, Ricardo. Not bad. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks. Now, Carmelina and also Audra. Girls, everything okay?
Very good, thank you.
I'm going to leave you now with Richard, okay? I will be back in 45 minutes. Richard, the panel is yours. See you in a bit.
Okay, great. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. And I will thank you very much for rearranging your schedules during this crazy time to be available for this. I hope you enjoy it. I hope everyone who's watching enjoys it. And of course, the NSCAC members who will get permanent access to these this discussion and all the other discussions that, I hope everybody really gets some good value out of this. So thank you very much. Maybe this is a pretty controversial topic, and it's been in the news a lot in soccer lately, of course, including recently. So I would like to start, and I can throw it out to either Audra or Carmelina, either one. Maybe if you want to start just by bringing everybody who's listening up to speed on where is this dispute at between the United States women's national team and the United States Soccer Federation? Where are we at right now?
Would you like to go, Audra?
So you go ahead.
Okay, so we're currently, it looks like the situation is a little bit at a standstill. So the U.S. Soccer Federation was an attempt to resolve all their, obviously issues outside of court, outside of trial and mediation. From what we're able to access, of course, we don't have all the details, but mediation didn't go as planned. A solution was not resolved, and therefore we're sort of in limbo. Obviously, COVID is in the way of understanding truly what's next in terms of the timing of the next steps, but really some of the latest news was a little bit, disturbing in the sense of what the U.S. Soccer Federation's position on the matter was. They started to publicly state, and we had access to the idea that they internally had viewed the men's game as superior in terms of physically and strength and skill was superior in the men's game, as well as their second argument, which again we'll dive into in a minute, was along the lines of that men play against or in harsher environments and therefore deserve more money. So there's a lot of institutional biases and sexism and things that are now out there for all of us to form our own individual opinions on. And that's why we're here today, is to really dive in on what's happening. President Cordero stepped down as a result of those comments. A new president is in place, Cindy Parlow-Cone. One fun fact before we enter the debate section is that Cindy Parlow-Cone was part of a 3-person panel as well, who was in parallel, like a parallel panel operating with the player group to attempt to find a solution outside of mediation. So now that she's in the president's seat, what does that look like for the players and the association now that she's fully representing both perspectives?
Audra, anything to add to that?
No, I'm ready to dive in now.
That's a pretty good summary of where we're at. So yeah, I mean it's at a standstill right now, and I guess I know we spoke even a little bit before we went live here about the part of the dispute being about the fact that the men's and the national teams in the States have different collective bargaining agreements. So maybe Audra, let's talk about that a little bit, maybe summarize the differences between the two and how do those affect this dispute?
Yeah, so they, I think the women's actually ends in 2021, their new agreement. And I believe the men are still operating off an old agreement. Yeah. And so within, as you kind of pull that apart, we're looking that the women are on a base salary right? So the top 18 allocated players, I believe it is, make about 100,000 paid from the U.S. Federation. They receive bonuses. There is healthcare and all the benefits that they receive. They're receiving because they weren't getting that in the professional league, right? So the men, they get pay as they play. They get bonuses of about 5,000, regardless if they win or lose, but they don't get the base salary, right? So there's appearances. Then you look at it from like a World Cup perspective, their appearance amounts. So the women would get about 37,000 for appearance, whereas the men actually get double, right? Yeah. So it's kind of breaking everything apart where there's that with the MLS and men's soccer, it's not all lumped into professional, whereas the women's, there is investment that U.S. soccer is doing into the NWSL, and there is a base salary, right? So those numbers, I think, yeah, we really have to pull them apart because they're not the same. And the fact that the women are looking to have basic benefits, healthcare, maternity leave, these are essential human rights that people should have in their workplace, which they're not getting playing for NWSL, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I have a few things to add to that. I think, we first stated the different timing of the CBAs. I think that's an interesting point, that the men are operating on different 5-year cycles when they go back and renegotiate. It's almost like when the women go back to renegotiate, they're always trying to play catch up on sort of a historical, institutionalized, set of standards that are never really there. And as the men progress, the women are still, the gap gets bigger because it's a chase. So that's sort of the first thing. And what is the U.S. Soccer Federation's priority? It's to treat men and women equally, right? Like, it's the only opportunity that that federations get is to even out and balance the scale, because we know it's not there in FIFA. We know the prize money is $440 million for the men when they win a World Cup and $30 million for the women. And I know those things are slightly changing, but nowhere, like, the gaps are just getting bigger. So we don't have to live there. Federations have this opportunity to now right the wrongs of the world of football and say, we are going to make a decision like Australia, like Norway, to treat the game the same. If we don't do it at the federation level, then we don't have a chance as women's sport. And as the leaders, 4-time world champions, 4-time Olympic or whatever, they've won everything a million times. So if they're not even going to set the example now, how do the rest of the world have even a chance, right? So if we start with just the mindset, take MLS and NWSL out of it. Those are two different pots of money. We're talking simply federation money. So Audra, to add to some of your examples of money, the current CBA for the men and women. So I have an example. So Megan Rapinoe versus, let's just say, a men's player like Bradley, right? So on the current CBAs, with the exact same amount of work, games, minutes played, et cetera, right? Just as it is today, Megan Rapinoe would make $1,159,000 for the same work. And Bradley would make $3,722,000. So that's where the CBAs need to, it's not about necessarily equal pay, it's equal pay structure that they are fighting for. So when you look at the 67 million, it's historically all collective losses since probably around the 99 era that they're trying to recollect. But really, that's a tough number. I don't know if I agree with back pay. In what world do you get the last 20 years of misplaced money? I don't know. They deserve a lot. I just don't know where they got the number from. That's just my...
I'm gonna chime in just because I see Eric Alves has asked a question, and I think maybe this can build on what we've just discussed, which is, aren't prize money and salaries based on revenues generated? And then he goes on to add that our CBAs, collective bargaining agreements, negotiated between parties, meaning there's an agreement on both sides based on negotiating positions. And I think maybe what he's getting at, which I know Carm kind of touched on, is like if we take the professional salaries from MLS or NWSL out, and we look at, well, okay, the national federation, you know, essentially you've got exhibition games, you've got World Cup qualification, and you've got the World Cup. Obviously, there's no argument that the United States women's team has been far more successful than the men's team in the World Cup, and they're the best women's team in the world. So let maybe to Karim or to Audra, would you like to maybe touch on that question, and how can maybe compensation be thought of in terms of playing for your national team, including World Cup, and you know, is it fair? Is it based on revenue generated, etc.?
Well, if we look at just that from the game day pay, we're looking at 50.8 million was the women that they generated, and then there was 49.9 million from the men. So the women actually made more money, generated more revenue when we look at it that way, with just, you know. But we're speaking about prize money of what, 400, what was it?
400. It's historically 400. It's being bumped to 440 now for the men for the next World Cup winners.
So we're speaking that as if the men's national team won the World Cup.
Correct.
As if that money actually was generated down. Because last I know is their highest was the quarterfinals.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then they didn't qualify, right? This last cycle.
That's it.
So now we could speak about this hypothetical money that they could achieve. And of course, if you're looking at it from a business standpoint, yeah, if you're going to invest all your money as in business to get, improve your men's side to potentially win this money. Yeah. But right now you have success on the women's side.
That's it.
It's 4 million, but it's 4 million that it's been consistently won and back to back and 4 titles, right? So, but then you have to look at the expenses. So how much does it cost the U.S. national team, like the federation, to, you know, keep the expenses of the men's team? So how much is being allocated, right? Expense wise. So it's not just black and white of revenue. Like, I don't think they even, when you dive into some of the marketing aspects of their budget, of the U.S. Federation's budget, it's not allocated to one team or the other. It's consolidated. So it's easy to move money around when you want to.
Right. So I'm definitely, this is something I feel passionately about, the whole marketing, revenue, sponsorship. So it's managed by an organization called SUM, right? So SUM is the Canadian equivalent I actually work for, CSB. Yeah. So with that being said, the management of those portfolios, of those assets, when you really dive into SUM, it's all the management of it. So first of all, it's important to state that the CEO of SUM is the commissioner of the MLS. The group of owners in SUM are the owners of the MLS. Okay, so that's important to talk about. So where you talk about biases or business decisions, people are going to chase money. We totally get that. When you really look and dive in, the NWSL is actually just sort of thrown on. There's no valuation for the NWSL independently. So we said there's pots of money surrounding the team. But when we look at just the U.S. Soccer Federation, the structure internally is imbalanced. And that's therefore, and the mindset, we started to learn a lot about the mindset through this litigation of they feel the sport's inferior. And that's where, you know, obviously everybody from a common sense and in moral standpoint, we're like, wait a second, if there is institutionalized sexism in the premise of their decision-making historically and today, that's the basis in which we're sort of arguing. So I agree with you, Audra, in the sense of we're not looking at dollars in and dollars out, because U.S. Soccer Federation is not SUM. They shouldn't be operating like that. They should be operating on the principles of equality and therefore paying the women for the work that they are doing, no different than the work that the men are doing, and leave the pro salaries on the outside of these discussions, although people have lumped them in when it's convenient.
That's a great point, and maybe Karma, I just want to touch on it if you can elaborate, because I did my homework before this debate, and I found that one of the claims in the suit from the United States women's team is this concept of institutional favoritism or institutional sexism, and they mentioned things like, for example, that the Copa America and Gold Cup final were scheduled to be played on the same day as the Women's World Cup final. The amount of times that the women have to play on artificial turf versus men. There's some again disputes about not getting access to chartered flights, lower quality accommodation, that kind of thing. So I guess obviously there's more than just money and pay involved. So how to either of you, maybe how do you see those issues? And then I know Carm kind of touched on it too. This comment that was made by Carlos Cordero about the game being different and about basically that it's it's whatever it is, it's more challenging for men and inferior, that kind of thing. So how much of a role do those institutional biases play, do you think?
Audra, would you like to go, or?
Well, I think that's right there. It's based on speed and what was it? Speed and strength, right?
Speed and skill.
So you're, yeah. But then it equated to your skill is better if you're faster, stronger. Yeah. So there's other aspects of the game. I mean, your mental, your ability to see the game quickly. There's so many other elements. So that's kind of just like one physical attribute, and that just cuts them off at the legs. Where is 50% of the participation in youth in grassroots in the US and even Canada, it's male and female. So if you're developing the game, a comment like that, not only like it defeats the purpose of what you're there to support. So it shows the bias and the sexism right there, right? And then how do you, as you mentioned earlier, is then how do you grow the women's game? How do you have proper facilities? How do you fight for equality as a leader in the world's game if your own federation exposed themselves, right? Yeah. Because there are great facilities in the US. There is like investment at university level, at multi levels, that their facilities should be their access for men and women. They have a pro league, right? So I mean, it's hard to grow the game when internally they don't even believe in growing the game, right?
Yeah. No, it's a good point. And what I heard there from both of you is there's something around, like, the best example that came to mind was Ada Hedeberg, right? So her federation, so the Norwegian Federation, did agree to equal pay. So there is equal pay there, and she still doesn't want to play for her national team, as we saw in the last World Cup, based on equal treatment. So the treatment is different. So some of the factors you alluded to earlier, Richard, the chartered flights, different arrangements with hotels, those are, for me, when I hear that, those are all controllables. Those are all budgetary decisions that are being made to treat one party differently than the other. And those are the things that are meant to be. In every CBA that goes by, some of those are amended. I do believe they have better flights now, or things of that nature. So there's some things in principle that can continue to get better and better. But again, it's already always starting from a behind standpoint, right? So I don't mean to be repetitive in some of my points, but what I'm trying to say is, if the number one team in the world cannot achieve, with all the achievements that they have had historically in major tournaments, which is their main core business and objective, if they're the ones that cannot achieve this, then the rest of the world is never going to catch up. And that's why this court case that's about this trial is so dangerous, because if US soccer wins on the premise of X, XY, whatever it is, then it gives every other federation permission to act in similar fashion. However, if the player group wins on equal treatment and pay structure, then the rest, you're going to start to see more federations with pressure from player groups and unions that they actually have to match. So this is a global case. Everybody should have their eyes on this, because it's going to affect the future of our game.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to make the distinction too between equal pay and equal treatment. They're two different things. And so I will I'll jump in again, because I see AC Lang here. She has asked.
Hi, AC.
Oh, AC. Yeah. You know her. Yeah.
She's awesome.
She is awesome. She outplayed me in my latest Ontario soccer clinic. So.
There you go.
in your opinion, she says, is it more important to pay the nation's top players equally to men, or to increase the pay of the average professional women's soccer player, and in brackets, a rising tide lifts all boats? So I guess I can put that one out there to either one of you. Which is more important, paying the top players equally to men or increasing a professional wage?
So that's even having that as a choice of, and that's actually a great question, because with the investment and going back with the pro teams, while in the new agreement and the support of NWSL, they actually have money that, they've allocated some more money that raised the average base salary, right, and the minimum salary. So I think it's 50,000, and then 20,000 is the minimum.
Yeah.
So now within NWSL, there's no like maternity leave, there's no healthcare, so they're still missing a lot of those elements as well. So. And if they're not allocated to the money that the US, like the top 18 players or 16 players, the numbers, wherever you look, it's changing. They barely are able to live off their salary, right? So now we're looking at, all right, we're fighting for the top ones to make equal to men, where the sustainability of players like Cindy Leroux, who like now she's no longer with the national team, right? And she just had a child, right? Now we're looking, is she able to, is she making the same amount of money as she did before, right? And there's that argument too, is we're losing, like the playing field is so like unbalanced in the sense, like why, like do we have the MLS players lower tier fighting to just have a sustainable like salary, right? Like it's
yes, I understand what you're saying. And AC, I like your question. I think it has a lot, it's two different buckets of money, right? Like there's something around the federation who have their pot of money grown in various ways, sponsorships, of course, which we already sort of touched upon, but also there's the membership money, and that's why COVID is so daunting for all federations, because without that membership money, people signing up for the sport, it affects all the budgets. So we're all going to be going through this issue very soon in a different way. So even this discussion after COVID would be interesting to have again, because we don't know what's going to happen. But anyways, I digress. I'll come back. With regards to what you're asking, is it better to achieve this standard for the top players or otherwise? With a women's league, let's just say here in Canada, if we were to achieve that massive goal and need, it's private money for the most part. It would be private money. It would be an owner pouring in and buying into a vision, and then supported by sponsorships and maybe foreign investments, et cetera, et cetera. All to say, if the national team operates and that country has a standard of equality or equity, that trickles down into the domestic system, that mindset. So right away, you'd start to see people show up to the table with the idea that we can't get away with treating, let's just say, CPL different than CPL, hypothetical CPLW in the future, or MLS and NWSL. You can't get away with that thing when the top is already agreed upon a certain level of treatment. So yes, we want to have more success for all, but it starts at the top, like most things do. That's my opinion.
Okay, great. I want to switch gears a little, just again in my research that I did prior to this discussion, that the solution that was proposed by the United States Women's Players Association actually was what they called a revenue sharing model, and essentially the basis of that model was that player compensation would be directly tied to how much revenue each team makes. So how much revenue the women's team generates, how much revenue the men's team generates. And I know because this discussion is focusing on revenue, and I think even, Eric Alves has kind of, commented again, about this, which is that it's a great point about equal treatment, but, what about revenue specifically? So what do either of you think of this proposed solution, this revenue sharing model, where compensation gets directly tied to revenue generated?
What do you think, Audra?
I'll let you take this one because it's not that black and white. I mean,
No, it's not. It's not.
That's where we're, again, like, as you look deeply into this issue, it's because there's too many ways. Like, I think in North America, it's a different model. I think the business model is different than European model, right? And I think the intent as well, right? So it's just too hard to isolate, right? Like, I don't know if that would benefit the women's game or not. I don't know yet. We'd have to really dive into that.
Well, the burst has been in the last 5 years, right? Like for women's sport specifically, if you really think about it, the NWSL started in 2013, like the third iteration of their pro league. So only in the last 5 years are you starting to see these exponential numbers of revenue. So to compensate women directly, it's almost like you're a salesperson and you're making, obviously your profit based on what you bring in. Like, that's not really where this is going. I don't believe this conversation. What it is going to is, what if we treated the game exactly the same? So visibility for women's sports wasn't at 4% in the US, which is a current statistic, which is terrible. And lots of people are obviously trying to rectify that. Many great organizations that are trying to change that. The Gist is one of them in the US, and here they're putting so much light on the women's game, and yeah, we appreciate those efforts. But all to say, what if, like tennis, okay, so this was a great example that I came across, when equal pay was established in tennis, so by Billie Jean King, right when that was established, you start to see the success over the years. It's almost like the Title IX thing. To make sure that there's quotas and things that are equal, then we can have the revenue dependent conversations. Until the things below that change, we have no chance. So the women are succeeding, the national team, the US specifically, they are succeeding in the lack of resources and visibility. That is even more impressive than anything a men's team could do with the same input, right? Their output is astronomical compared to the input. This is why the heartstrings are being pulled at. So there are some things that live in common sense and what's right, moral, and there's some things that live in legal. And I think we're getting some of the questions I'm seeing are maybe getting caught up a little bit in the legalities and the business and the revenue, the hard black and whites. It's actually not that.
So that's an excellent point, and I think maybe to summarize a bit, I would say it's almost like a chicken and egg analogy. For example, if there was equal treatment, equal exposure,
Perfect.
marketing, those kind of things, would we then see greater output, and without or is it the output that's required first in order to earn equal treatment?
For women, it is. For women, it is.
Yeah. I think that's sort of just the way it's been, and that's, I guess, is the whole basis of this dispute and the lawsuit right off the bat. So I would like to just maybe I want to touch on the again some of the differences in the bargaining agreement and what that led to, which was and I guess the reason that it's looking like this dispute is going to go to trial, which is that the U.S. Women's Federation actually requested $67 million. I mean, they called it back pay, essentially, and that would have been in order to avoid going to trial.
Yeah.
And, I don't want to, give it away. I'd like to discuss it a bit, but can you, I'll open that up to the two of you to say, what do you think about that request? Is it fair? What was it based on? And then, the response from U.S. Soccer, which essentially was, we don't, it is fair. So.
Bit frozen there.
Yeah.
I can start off with this one as you've been starting, Audra. I'll quickly get into the fact that this actually originated, I have it here in 2016 as a filing with the Equal Opportunity Commission. So if we remove soccer or sport, would these policies, aspects of this agreement, would this be able to stand in other disciplines? It's a question to the group. Like, is this something that would be able to fly? Like every industry is fighting for equality and fighting for more senior women leadership and all the things we're all fighting for. So because this started as an equal employment opportunity, for me, that's an interesting part, that this has developed into something that's quite global in the news. But I don't know if I'm clear. Like, what I'm trying to say is I believe this is more to do with equal treatment, which is where the world is headed. I think we're getting caught up in sport a little bit, as like the storylines.
And that's where they kind of, where the lines are being fuzzy and why the revenue are coming in, right? It's because it was marketed and labeled as like the idea that the top players who already make a lot want to make more. There's the underlining tone that no, we're not treated like, there's basic needs that are not being treated, right? Mm-hmm. And it's so easy to change your narrative, right? But what's going to happen in court, though, it's going to come down to what is, is this, there is facts, black and white. Mm-hmm. And when you add them together, like, that's the thing, is there's no swaying anything there. It's if do you get, the same amount of training? Yes or no? Do you get the same, like, that's what the court's it's gonna take away all the biased narrative that's out there in the media. And the media actually, it's in favor, right, really, for the women's game right now, because it's hit mainstream marketing and media, and it's gotten so much attention that yes, this is great. It's front line, it's mainstream, and that's what you want, because like you said, it's not just hitting the game, right? It's not about soccer, it's women's rights, right? And this is going to help us grow the game, right? But why do we have to do marketing power that way? Why does it have to be that we have to fight for basic treatment?
Yeah. And I hope personally what comes out of this is not only do the women get what they sort of deserve in the court of law, like what that number comes to is going to be a sort of equation of sorts, but all to say, like, I really hope that the structures change so that some and other people who are looking to sponsor the team can actually do so independently. Because right now, we said this earlier, it's just this big lump sum of money that gets distributed by the powers that be. So I believe that the women's game, based on the question even earlier, how, if it's based on revenues, we don't actually, you can look at a chart graph and see, oh, they brought in 50 mil and they brought in 50 mil. But it's about the commercial rights and things. So what is the valuation of the NWSL? What is the independent valuation of the U.S. women's national team? Until we have those numbers and until business is looked at as such, then we don't have any data to go off of, because to your point earlier, Audra, it's all just one pot of money that we're using, internal biases to distribute. That is the problem. So I hope that by the end of this, men have a structure that works for them, that we understand how much they're worth, and then we understand how much the women's game is worth.
Yeah, and to be fair, also, if you think about it, it's even just separating. Like, I think it's good to see the separation, but if we look at on cutting costs, a shared model of an organization that owns an MLS franchise and an NWSL.
Not sure if I've lost you there.
You're back. We got you. You're back now.
But sharing resources and operational costs, that's fine. You know what? If that makes it's both leagues sustainable, if it makes sense, that doesn't take away, if it brings value to growth of the women's game, and if there's tangible value for both, for the men, for the women, if it puts us on an equal playing field, then that's okay for shared resources. That's okay for combined budgets, as long as it's distributed to be able to give fair investment into both.
Yes, and everything that we're saying, I like it, because we're actually separating US soccer with pro leagues, again, that sit outside. So what you're saying there is like, yes, internally, if they shared those operational costs and then revenue generated from the spectacles and events, I think we'd all be quite shocked that, you know, even the fact that last year, what did you see the fact that all the women's jerseys from Nike in the US were the highest sold jersey,
Yep.
like of all time? So that's where the women are saying, listen, you're making money off of my name, the performance I just had. My life's work is profitable by the Nikes of the world, by everyone else. And have you noticed also, I read this article, like the sponsors in this, which is a huge discussion because you can really tell by their campaigns who they're focusing on. So like, for example, Nike has been really quiet. You haven't heard anything from Nike because it's too interwoven. They're benefiting off of this in some ways, but their campaigns are very female forward. So there's this really interesting dynamic. But then you hear Coca-Cola wants to have a meeting in regards to this. And the second sponsors start removing potential, you know, big funding that they've provided these teams in both programs, you start to see the U.S. Federation likely and some react in very different ways. So where does the power lie right now? And I would argue that it lies in the hands of the sponsors, which is a very, very interesting place for it to sit.
Yeah, I agree.
Hi, Richard, are you with us? He's frozen. It's okay. Yeah. We can keep it going. But anything interesting, anything else that you've come across, Audra, in the last in your research? I know there's a couple, you know, more interesting facts with the last, 8 minutes we have left here, but
there was also going back to NWSL. For me, it's a no-brainer when we're looking at a national, like a federation that drives money. We keep talking about sponsorship and game day, but there's also other revenue. Yes, it's not in the millions. It's lower with participation, grassroots, and we're looking at, coach education. There's still revenue streams that are coming in to U.S. soccer, right? That and development fees, like how much money when a MLS team sells a U.S. player, is there a kickback to U.S. soccer? Like, there's a lot of details that we need to pull out that, where for me, we shouldn't be even arguing they should have equal pay when it comes to the U.S., that part. So now we go with the NWSL, and in 2020, they just actually got a new agreement. And so to pull it up, there's actually 87 games that are going to be picked up by, CBC maybe? I think so. I have it written here.
Yeah, you're right.
Which I think that's huge. So how did that come about? Right. So there was talk that NWSL was like some clubs. It's even a different model, right? MLS is it's owned. So there's investors. So if you look at the business model versus NWSL, they did have a lot of support to get NWSL from U.S. Soccer in the first couple of years, right?
Yeah.
And they made it very clear that they want to run and operate on their own, right?
Yeah.
So now, as we break down their new model, they did a great job and they signed a contract for 87 out of 108 games being televised.
Yes.
And then the remaining games, it's going to be paid, I think it's five something a match.
Back to visibility, 100%.
Which is excellent. So how did they get to that point? Was it this, this lawsuit? Is it the success of the women's game? Well, I think it's the growth of the women's game.
Yeah, it absolutely
there's
is.
So many elements. I also believe that what's happening in Europe now and the investment in EPL teams and European big clubs, they're investing in the women's game as well.
Yep. Yeah,
because
they are.
50% of their fan base are women. So there's a crossover.
That is so correct. And, it would be hard not to talk about what's happening today. I read a great little, it's a blog by a player who's on PSG, and she put her blog up on LinkedIn. Okay. And her blog said, can we talk about the female elephant in the room? And it was a very interesting take where obviously there's a lot of men's pro clubs that are going to be struggling financially based on the current situation, COVID-19. And therefore, what's the first program that's likely to be cut is a second team or a female program, either one. So when the game is so heavily dependent on the men's game.
Carmelina, let me just...
Yep. Richard,
sorry. Just talk a bit about of the Portuguese reality right now about women's soccer. Right now, there is a lot of investment of the Portuguese FA in women's soccer.
Yep.
I believe that only from 5 years, I would say yes, 5 years, they start investing and doing something with women's soccer, because it was completely amateur at the moment. And now, of course, the Portuguese FA is in a good financial situation because all of the results of the men's national team.
Correct.
So they are taking some of the funds to invest in women's soccer. And the results are start to showing, people are starting to go to the stadiums to see a match, a women's match. It was not normal for us, So I believe that things are changing in that specific matter, and I believe that it's good for business. And the FA of Portuguese FA is seeing the women's soccer as a package that they can sell in a package to the sponsors.
Of course.
For instance, buy this and have this also. It's more visibility, and I believe that if this women's soccer can be understood at these first steps in Portugal as something that can be added to a sponsored package, that might be very interesting in the business point of view. Of course, sure. Go on, Carolina.
The most important part about what you said is we all know that every successful women's league in the world right now, currently France, England, let's just say Spain is up and coming. Portugal's new, it's newer, it's coming up. All to say, they all have very successful men's programs. So that's why I haven't talked a lot about Canada, because our reserves historically, right, not qualifying for World Cups, not placing in World Cups, the federation's funds are low. I haven't brought that up once because the difference with the US team, which is the topic of the day, is that they have the money. It's a conscious decision, as opposed to in Canada where there is a genuine lack. So even with you in Portugal, you're saying, oh yeah, the women's game is starting. That's a conscious decision with a pot of money that they have.
Yeah.
And hopefully in Portugal, which I don't know, I'd have to research, I hope they're starting off from a better learning from all the other federations who have not treated the game equally. And I'm hoping they do that well for the women there.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe that that everything is being done as it should. Even with programs on the school level, at the lower school level, trying,
yeah, great.
They have the money, they have the time, so I believe that they will be able to start producing some results very, very soon. Okay, so it looks like Richard is unable to get in. He said that the Wi-Fi connection went out. So
no problem.
I would like to thank both of you, Carmelina and Audra. Thank you for your explanation about this specific subject. I must tell you that that is a subject that we haven't heard about it here in Europe at the moment. I believe it's very interesting, and it will have some kind of impact in what we are thinking about women's soccer also in Europe. So thank you for your contribution, Carmelina and Audra. Nice meeting you both, and I hope that I can see you girls soon. Okay.
Perfect. Thanks, Audra. Great to meet you. We'll be speaking soon. And Ricardo, thanks for this.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you both.